You're at a family gathering, sitting slightly off to the side. Someone asks how you're doing, and you give a short, clean answer. Not cold. Just, contained. You listen more than you talk. You make a dry joke when the conversation gets too loud. You check your phone, not because you're bored, but because you need a moment of quiet that no one will interrupt. And then later, someone whispers it. You hear it, or you feel it. You're so distant. You're hard to read. Why are you always like this? People think you're emotionally unavailable. Detached. Maybe even a little cynical. But that's not the full story. Not even close. Because what looks like distance might actually be a form of precision. Stay with me. There's a psychological pattern here often called emotional self-reliance. Not the kind you read in books. The kind you build quietly, over time, without realizing it. It's the habit of handling things yourself. Not because you don't trust people, but because you learned, early on, that depending too much on anyone was risky. Think back for a second. You grew up in a time where the adults around you were busy, distracted, sometimes overwhelmed. You learned how to let yourself in the house. You learned how to make your own snacks. You learned how to wait. A lot. No one sat you down and said, you need to become independent. You just adapted. So you started solving your own problems. Handling your own emotions. Making your own sense of things. Not in a dramatic way. Quietly. Efficiently. Like folding a shirt and putting it away. Here's the twist. That independence didn't turn you cold. It made you careful. Careful with who you open up to. Careful with how much you show. Careful with when you let someone see you when you're not okay. Because somewhere in your system, there's a quiet calculation running. If I can handle it myself, I won't have to be disappointed. And that's not weakness. That's intelligence shaped by experience. But this goes deeper than you think. Because it's not just about emotions. It's about control. When you were younger, a lot of things were out of your control. Adult moods. Family stress. Social expectations that didn't always make sense. So you built a small island of control inside yourself. Your thoughts. Your reactions. Your boundaries. And now, as an adult, that island is still there. Solid. Reliable. But sometimes, it's a little lonely. Here's the paradox. The more capable you are of handling everything alone, the harder it becomes to let anyone help you. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to need it. And that's an uncomfortable truth. Because needing people always carries the risk of being let down. And your nervous system remembers what that felt like, even if you don't consciously think about it anymore. So you stay composed. You stay thoughtful. You stay just a little bit guarded. And from the outside, people misread it. They think you don't feel deeply. When in reality, you feel everything. You just don't perform it. Your generation was taught, directly or indirectly, that emotions are private. That you don't make a scene. That you don't burden others. That you keep going. That context matters. You didn't become this way in a vacuum. You were shaped by a culture that valued toughness, quiet endurance, and self-sufficiency. So of course you learned to internalize things. Of course you became selective with your vulnerability. But here's a softer reframe. What if your distance isn't a flaw, but a boundary you built to protect something very real and very sensitive? What if your independence isn't avoidance, but a skill that kept you stable when things were uncertain? What if your calm, dry way of being is actually a form of emotional regulation that a lot of people still haven't learned? It's complicated. Because yes, sometimes that same self-reliance can keep you from experiencing closeness the way you might secretly want. And yes, sometimes it can make people feel like they can't reach you. But it also means you're resilient, observant, grounded. You don't panic easily. You don't collapse under pressure. You don't need constant reassurance to know who you are. And that's not nothing. So maybe the question isn't, why am I like this? Maybe the question is, where did this way of being protect me, and where might it be keeping me a little too safe now? You don't have to become someone else. You don't have to suddenly overshare your feelings at every dinner table. But you can notice the moments when you do want to let someone in, and experiment with opening the door just a few inches wider than usual. Not all at once. Just enough. Because the same strength that taught you how to stand alone, can also help you choose, carefully, who you stand with. And maybe being hard to read isn't the problem. Maybe it just means your story is written in a language that only the right people will take the time to learn.